There's lots of professional advice we hear on how to have a healthy marriage. It's a lot tougher, though, if you have a mentally unhealthy partner. How does your partner's mental health issues, be it depression, addiction, or anxiety disorders, affect the marriage and impact on you? What can and should you do if that is your partner? Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg. And with me today is the director of the Couples Laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she leads the studies here at the university with a minion of students on how these problems affect their subjects, multitudes of younger and older couples. Dr. Lauren Papp is an associate professor of human development and family studies, and her ongoing research involves mental health and well-being of individuals stemming from their intimate relationships. Thanks for joining us, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, Dick.
In your lab, and also all the research you've done, how tied is one's mental health and happiness to the health of one's marriage?
Very closely tied. We see consistent links between what's going on in your relationship and how you're doing as an individual person, both in terms of your physical health and your emotional health.
And I'm wondering, so if you are a happy person and you get in a marriage that's unhappy, then you're not going to be a happy person, huh?
Well, there are different ways to look at it. Bringing your happiness and a strength like that to the relationship is certainly going to help. One of the main predictors or determinants of whether your relationship is happy is how couples work through their problems together and how conflicts are resolved.
But I have this belief, if you're really a crab or you're really an unhappy, miserable person, marriage won't make you happy.
That is true. And if you're consistently unhappy and focusing on the negative, your communications with your partner, your relationship with your partner will definitely be more distressed and challenged, and it will be hard to have a happy, enduring relationship.
It's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? It's kind of like, okay, and I've said this too in my work, marriage is the biggest predictor of your happiness, yet it doesn't make you happy.
Exactly.
But let's add now to your area of expertise. You marry a person who's got mental health issues. How is that going to affect the likelihood of a good marriage?
Well, it definitely affects it, and in what specific ways really depends on what the issues of the other person.
Good, because I'm ready for you.
Okay.
With a whole list of issues.
Okay.
I shouldn't say good like this is wonderful. That's kind of not being a nice person. But in fact, if someone does have, let's say, fairly serious depression,
yes,
how is that going to play out in the marriage?
Yes, and depression is a nice one to start with, I think, Dick, because that is the psychological issue or disorder that has been studied the most consistently in our studies of relationships. What we know about depressed people is that their communication, their interactions with others are impaired due to their beliefs and their feelings and their emotions. Communication is troubled, particularly when differences come up or in discussing difficult topics, issues that need to be resolved. People with more depression symptoms or more signs of depression have a harder time connecting with their partner. During conflicts and problem-solving discussions, they have a harder time expressing positivity, expressing positive behaviors, things like problem-solving and support during these conversations. That is noted by their partner, who might be looking for some work towards the solution to whatever they're working through.
Let's think about what that means.
Sure.
So your partner's depressed, you're not. Are they going to have a harder time giving you positive feedback, making you feel appreciated?
Yes. They, during differences or conflicts, they'll be expressing more anger, more sadness, or even fear when they're talking, and that is picked up by the partner.
Okay, so you're kind of zeroing in on conflict resolution as the issue. I'm thinking if you just have a person who's sad all the time, do they have room to make you glad? Do they have room to say, I love you, I really appreciate you, you're so smart, things like that?
Yes, there's definitely room. I think with depression, there's a tendency for people to focus inward, be focusing on their negative feelings, their self-doubt, their low self-esteem, their lack of energy, and making your partner feel supported, feel happy. That takes energy, right? Our closest relationships take work.
Yeah.
And someone who has...
That's not how Hollywood, makes it look.
Right. No, and we are taught in many ways that relationships should come easy, and maybe that they don't need a lot of work. And people who believe that may end up having problems keeping relationships going and consistent. But for somebody who is experiencing depression, those negative feelings, that lack of energy, that definitely takes a toll on the other partner, who may feel like they need to do more to keep that partner going, keep the relationship going. Yeah. And it's hard.
So it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work. Are they more self-absorbed?
When I think of depression, I don't think of self-absorbed in terms of having overly high levels of confidence.
No.
But it's hard to look out when you're feeling so low inside.
So you're thinking about your own pain.
Yes.
And yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're a happy person,
mm-hmm.
let's take the flip side.
Sure.
It's easier to be more present to the other person?
Yes. I would think you have more energy to do that. And if you have that capacity to connect with others. So some people can be very happy, but they also have very such high levels of confidence and self-esteem that it can be difficult to look outward. So I think there's a delicate balance.
Really? That surprises me. I would think if you really feel good about yourself, not obnoxiously braggadocio, which probably is based on insecurity, but you just are very content with yourself.
Yes.
Wouldn't you be great to live with?
Then I think you have found the balance between confidence and energy on the one hand and being able to connect with others. Yes.
Yeah. Conflict. You mentioned
mm-hmm.
that, and if someone is depressed, you have much, and since conflict resolution is important too.
Very important.
What happens when you're depressed and you have a fight?
Yeah. People who have more depression are not as able to problem solve, as I mentioned. They tend to be more negative.
What happens?
That step of focusing on the issue, making steps towards resolution, that is one of those outward-looking things, right? People mm-hmm. who are depressed and looking inward also tend to make more negative statements about their partner. They're more critical.
Why? Why?
This negative cycle that's going on. If you're feeling negative about yourself and negative about your situation, your partner in your relationship are likely to be pulled into that negative cycle as well.
Yeah. I like to think about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel negative about yourself
mm-hmm.
and your partner says, you should have pulled the car out slower or whatever, if you feel good about yourself, if you're happy versus you're depressed, what's your reaction? How's it going to be different to that statement?
Yeah, that you should have just sounds like such an attack to people who have depression. That could be interpreted as a very personal attack.
And they don't have much in their they're not
exactly
they can't handle
regret over what's happened in the past. So if you're that partner and you want to make a suggestion about how to do something in the future, I think it's important to look for the next opportunity rather than focusing on something that's already happened and talking about the situation. Why is it important how we back out of the garage
mm-hmm.
Rather than making it about the person?
Mm-hmm.
So making the issue or the thing that needs to be resolved simply about the issue and not linking it to a problem or something wrong with the person.
Well, that's true with any conflict, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to say that you're stupid, that you did that like a dummy.
Right.
You want to say, next time I wonder if you could do it this way because I get nervous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the depressed person, I'm sensing, if you give them any negative feedback, they're going to hear it louder
mm-hmm.
than the person who feels okay.
Yeah, I think that's one way to say it. They may be more sensitive, more reactive, and then not able to pull on those positive behaviors or emotions that could actually help this issue get resolved.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a cycle where issues tend to come up over and over, and we know that as things aren't resolved and come up again repeatedly, the issues are just harder to handle. They take on a life of their own. It's no longer about how we, solve this one issue. It's a much broader pattern.
Well, I want to play that out a little. We
Okay.
can get to that, and maybe we can have a good fight and see how
Sure.
it works out. And I'll be depressed, and I'll be happy.
Okay.
But maybe I won't put you through that. But let's take a look at another thing. The very anxious partner.
Yes.
How does that play out?
Yes. Well, anxiety is another interesting psychological problem to talk about, because that is relatively common just in the U.S. population and just among people in general. And we're seeing that reflected. There's been a lot more research focused on anxiety as well. In fact, one study that was based on national level data, so it's a pretty good overview of what's going on with adults in this country at least, showed that of 9 possible psychiatric diagnoses, general anxiety was the strongest correlate, or the most closely related to marital dissatisfaction and conflict. Mm-hmm. So this
generalized anxiety disorder.
Yes,
Okay.
and so this seems to be just connected with.
Okay. For our audience, what that means is you're kind of high-strung and anxious all the time. Little things bother you everywhere, and kind of continual state of feeling frightened. Fair, and so that is very high correlated with
marital distress, and was the most predictive psychological problem in terms of marital distress.
Really, more so than depression?
Yes, in some studies.
Why would that be worse than depression?
Anxiety is often, while the depressed person might be looking inward, anxiety, people are often expressing this in different ways, either asking for reassurance, so they're really looking for reassurance from their partner. They might be acting out on some of their worries. So this may interfere with our close relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So the person is kind of high-strung or kind of jumpy.
Jumpy. They need reassurance. So, and they might might play out differently in relationships than depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
The depressed partner, for example, might be
Yeah.
more sympathetic
really?
to the partner, whereas the anxious partner might be kind of drawing things out, and we might see more conflicts that way. Because
Are they more sparky?
They could have more energy than the depressed person.
I mean, quick to ignite.
Exactly. They
quicker
could be.
to get mad because they're on edge all the time.
They could be.
I mean, the depressed person, might they be a little mellower because they're so depressed
they might
don't just
let
jump
some
to
things go due to low energy. So.
Yeah, whereas the highly anxious person doesn't come off as low energy, can come off almost the opposite.
Yeah, there might be more attacking or more
They attack
criticisms. It could be.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a big one that might not. This could be a half-hour discussion about living with someone addicted. So let's start with alcohol. An alcoholic.
Yes, and that is consistently linked with problems in relationships, problems in marriage. We also see that the problematic use of alcohol by one partner is related to higher symptoms of depression in the other partner as well. So this is, a pattern and a cycle we see. We think of alcohol use and problems with alcohol use it develops a pattern in a relationship. And this can start with one person having too much alcohol or engaging in a problematic use of alcohol, and this happens over time. So then if we think of this cycle, one person has the substance behavior, they drink, the other partner responds to that by perhaps bringing up past instances of drinking. Some partners react by caretaking, but there's usually a response. Once this becomes a pattern, the other partner responds in a certain way. This pattern can lead to conflicts, and that conflict in the relationship then becomes an interpersonal problem, and interpersonal problems then serve to promote or spark the next episode of drinking. So it becomes a cycle where these interpersonal problems and drinking go together.
Wow. I wonder how often it happens that you marry someone who didn't have a drinking problem and they develop one versus they had it when they started.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because we know that how partners drink together, or the combination of partners drinking, is actually really important too. So we've looked at this in different ways. It's not just whether one partner drinks and the other partner doesn't, because we do know that these symptoms and these behaviors often go together. So one person might drink, then the other person can respond to that by drinking as well. And these have been termed drinking partnerships, where...
Do you mean that because your partner drinks too much, you might start drinking too
Exactly.
much to keep them company in their drinking?
Keep them company, to cope with the problems that result from their drinking.
Wow.
As a way to kind of accommodate that behavior. It may be a way of, helping the partner through that. But as you can imagine, not addressing that initial expression of a drinking problem can lead to more individual and relationship problems over time.
Is there any difference in someone who has a drinking problem and someone who has a drug addiction problem, living with that person?
Yes, and those complicated issues, complicated questions, and difficult to compare across the two, but we would expect to see problems in both types of relationships. I think when you're talking about substances, a lot of times what brings these issues to the forefront is that there are external consequences that ensue. So people who have drinking or drug problems often, experience problems at work. They experience problems with other people, because these are really issues that affect people and, people around them.
So if you were getting married tomorrow, and you could choose between someone who's an alcoholic or someone who's addicted to heroin, which would be harder for you to live with from your studies?
Well, that's hard to say. So I'm not drawing on a specific study here, because behaviors like heroin use, that's so risky for many reasons that we often don't have the opportunity to look at those people in their relationships for a long time. I mean, those are very high risk behaviors that have. So I would venture to say that the relationship with the person who has the drinking problem is going to last longer than the relationship with the person who is involved in drug use like that, simply because they're going to have so many other problems that relationship,
How about the more serious mental issues, like someone is narcissistic and diagnosable as a narcissist, or other personality disorders, and living with a person like that, borderline personality disorder? These are people who have very severe mental health issues.
Very severe mental health issues, very severe personality problems. If we think about the person who's really high on narcissism, they are so inwardly focused, and that's the hallmark of that issue. They're so inwardly focused, it's almost hard to imagine them in a long-term committed relationship. And there's so few studies on that. I could find there are studies that have looked at people with higher levels of narcissism, and maybe we should clarify that these are people who endorse behaviors like, when I'm talking to other people, I look at myself in the mirror, you kind of, to give you a picture, they're not in long-term relationships, but studies that have looked at narcissists at the beginning of marriage, these are people who, even during the first year of marriage, which is typically the happiest time in a couple's life, right? When they first become newlyweds or solidify their commitment to each other, people who have such high opinions of themselves not only imagine that they have other alternatives, other possible partners to pursue, but that they would actually be likely at that point in their relationship to pursue some of these other relationships. And actually having high levels of narcissism is a good predictor of likelihood of infidelity. And so, when you're seeing things like that at the start of a relationship, the likelihood that that relationship will continue for many, many years is just not very high.
And then you have borderline personality disorder, who's the person who's so deeply insecure that they can love you, then hate you.
Yes,
love
and
you
those
again,
can
then hate
be
you.
very dramatic relationships and very close connections, but also very problematic because of the ups and downs and the pulling away and getting so close. But those would be healthy. It would be difficult to keep healthy relationships going if left untreated.
Yeah. Are any of these contagious? You mentioned about the drinking. It's sort of contagious because if you try to accommodate, hopefully someone listening to this, and if they have a partner with a drinking problem, might be wise enough not to. But besides that,
depression and depressive symptoms are very widely acknowledged as being contagious. And I've actually heard therapists say this too. You can be in a room with someone who's depressed, and in that case, everything about the person is down. They're looking down, their voice is down, their bodies, are hunched over, facing down, and that wears on you. If you're connected to that, if you're exposed to that, and it's hard to not kind of fall into that, because those feelings of sadness and low self-esteem and low energy, that's so visible. It's so apparent that you can really just sense when somebody's going through that. If you think about couples over time who are interacting with partners who tend to be depressed, you're expending more energy and more effort to work through these relationship things. And so the next time this issue comes up, you might be quicker to jump to that conflict or to react to it.
The non-depressed person.
The non-depressed person, yeah. And so I think we could see some growing together around that over time if it's not treated initially.
What if you are a therapist type person, maybe not a therapist, but you live with someone who's depressed, and you're very caring and you're very interested in nurturing others? Might this be great? I shouldn't say it wouldn't be great, but might this fit into your sweet spot of, tell me your pain?
It might fit, and I think that's many relationships would keep going that way. And I think one of the things that person would need to do is periodically just take stock and say, is the relationship working for me? Is the relationship helping me? Or is that excessive caretaking preventing me from doing things that I would want to do or that would be good for me or my partner or our family to do? And so it's not to say that in every relationship both people are 100% healthy all the time, and that's not the case. When you want to notice it is if these mental health problems are affecting how happy you are, how productive you are. And of course, excessive caretaking like that could keep you from doing other things that might be beneficial for you.
Well, how kind of, not strange, but people are all different.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if some people kind of target in on someone with some disorder because it works for their disorder or whatever.
I think that might be one way that relationships continue with people from all levels of mental health. And I want to clarify, we don't see people who have depression all the time, right?
Sure.
There's levels of things, and these are symptoms that fluctuate, and they go up and down, and they change over time. So we could see that people who have more symptoms are attracted to people who are similar on that, and so that certainly could happen. And
what happens if two depressed people are together?
Well, again, I think it goes back to how is the relationship going. If people recognize that this is something that they need to work on and their partner needs to work on the one hand, if they're aware of it and know what that experience of being depressed is like, that could really help the relationship. And if both people have been through something like that, then you're really educated or have that knowledge, and hopefully those couples would also recognize, okay, when is it time for us to seek additional help? When do we need to, get some counseling or extra assistance to make sure that this person stays okay? So there could be a benefit to people having similar psychological issues or experiences because then you could be that much more in tune with what's going on and getting the resources that you need to get through it.
So let's say you have a friend who is 29 and they're dating, and they say, Lauren, look out for me. What are you going to look out for them? What are you going to sort of warn them about when they look at the mental health of who they're dating?
I would say that the important things, first of all, does this person, fit a pattern? So there's no one ideal person, I think. But if your friend was asking me this because they were concerned, I would say, are you noticing things that have been problems before? And so that's one thing that I would encourage the friend to think about is this fitting a pattern that hasn't worked in the past? Because then maybe the friend needs to address something before the relationship can progress.
What I'm kind of wondering with that is, do people know what they're getting when they get engaged?
Interesting. And you mentioned around 29, and from your clinical work that a lot of these things like depression and anxiety are most commonly diagnosed in the early 30s, right? So a lot of marriages and committed relationships have started before then. So you may, it can go either way. You may see consistency, and if people were having problems before getting married, those problems could continue. It's also very common for people to not have had an episode of depression or anxiety, and then due to circumstances, changes, the relationship itself, they can then go on to experience something like depression or anxiety. So it's very difficult to predict.
So now you are married. You look at your partner and you realize my partner is depressed or my partner is very anxious. What do you do?
Again, I think it depends on which disorder it is. So if it's, let's say depression, you want to learn about depression so you can understand that there are physical and emotional symptoms that go along with this. You want to be supportive, but that is, for depressed people, sometimes there's a tendency to say, just go out and do it. Come on, let's go. Depression symptoms take care of themselves or get resolved slowly. You can't expect somebody to go from being depressed back to 110% the next day. This takes time, so you may need to be patient. You want to validate what they're feeling, so you don't, saying things like, it's not that bad. That would be very invalidating. But at the same time, try to provide some realistic evidence so the depressed person has something to hold on to.
To convince them they're suffering from depression, you mean? So they can identify they really have a clinical problem?
That would be one way to provide evidence. But then also, if they're feeling very down about themselves, point to something realistic that they have done, something concrete that you can point to in a way to just gently challenge that they are worthless or not able to do anything.
But then you're in the role of being their therapist, right?
Exactly.
And you want that role?
I think if your partner is experiencing depression, getting professional help and support would be important.
And they say, no, I'm not going to some therapist.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, for depression, you can offer to go with your partner. Being seen as a couple has been shown to be very effective, or just as effective as individual therapy. So you could
for the depression.
For the depression. Going to a couple's therapy or a couple's approach for depression also has the benefit of potentially resolving any of the relationship issues that could be causing or caused by the depression. So the couples therapy can have an added bonus there.
How about with the other things you mentioned, with anxiety? Would that also be a model?
Yes, anxiety is, a lot of times as we said, with anxiety, there are certain behaviors that happen. People with obsessive compulsive disorders or tendencies might be checking things a lot. So before you go to bed, you need to make sure, an excessive number of times that the doors are all locked. If you're that partner who's watching this happen, I would say your goal then is to help your partner through that distressing behavior, not by going and checking the doors yourself, but helping them see that things are okay when the doors aren't checked too many times. That's also something that can be worked on with a couples therapist.
When do you give up? When do you say, I'm walking away?
And leave? One indicator that I would say is, needs immediate attention is if there's physical abuse or aggression. Conflict and differences, we expect those in all relationships, and hopefully partners have the resources to work through those in relatively positive ways, but all relationships have some differences and conflict. It's never acceptable to experience aggression, emotional belittling or abuse or control, things like that, physical aggression. That would be one sign that, I would definitely consider getting outside help in that.
If the person
issues.
says, I'm not going to one of those therapists, then what?
Then the other person needs to think, is this relationship helping me? Is this a healthy relationship for me?
Wouldn't you tell your friend get out?
I would.
Yeah.
I would.
Okay. Is there anything we haven't covered in our closing moments here that you would like to make sure you have an opportunity to share?
No, I think we've covered a lot. I think in terms of what, people who are interested in maintaining a healthy relationship and for promoting relationship success, try to be agreeable and engaged with your partner most of the time. The things that you would like to get from your partner, like kindness and forgiveness, chances are your partner would like to receive those as well. Do your best to stay healthy and happy for your own sake as well as for the relationship. So as we've seen, there's connection between how one partner is feeling and the other. So if you take good care of yourself, that actually helps your relationship as well. And then devote the energy that's needed to keep your emotional and physical affection high. The time that you spend doing this is really an investment for maintaining a satisfying relationship, and it will keep your daily happiness and health high as well as for your partner. That said, we've talked about some potentially serious psychological issues or disorders, and those issues need to be resolved first before the relationship can really thrive. So whether it's with individual therapy or couples therapy,
get some help.
Hopefully that help can take place.
Dr. Lauren Papp, thanks for filling us in on this subject, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights. And remember, you can find all our podcasts at dickgoldbergradio.com or search for Dick Goldberg at iTunes or YouTube.